Good afternoon. Welcome to the June 21st, 2023 Public Services Committee. Before we get started, I would just ask you all to either turn off or silence your telephones or mute them if you can. If you're online and you would like to speak, go ahead and do the raised hand function. If you want to testify here in the room, please come to the podium and turn on the microphone so that we can get all your information. We would ask that you give us your name, that type of thing, so that we can have it for the record. There will be no additional business discussed following completion of the agenda. And with that, we have a big agenda today, so clerk, if we could have the first item, please.
Number 12, ordinance, second reading, creating chapter 2.96 ethical obligations of public officials, public members, and city employees of Title II, administration and personnel of the municipal code of the city of Cheyenne, Wyoming, specifying the ethical duties and obligations of public officials, public members, and employees of the city of Cheyenne.
Staff report, please. Staff report. Our city attorney.
Stephanie Boster, Cheyenne City Attorney. This is not my ordinance, but it is Dr. Aldridge's. But for the purpose of starting the discussion, what council has before you, change adopting ethical conflict of interest guidelines for members of the governing body, employees, and boards and commissions. This has been postponed on second reading, and I'm available for questions.
Committee, do you have any questions? Foster.
By there. So, through you, Mr. Chairman, there was one of our employees, a couple of last time had mentioned that there was possibly an issue with like 2.96.050 where it talks about supervisor, manage, and immediate family member, domestic partner. And my question was, is that reference even needed? Because aren't those dealt with in our rules and regulations?
Mr. Chairman, through you to Dr. Rennie, I don't find those in our existing rules and regulations. I know that they did exist in prior iterations, but I took a look through the employee handbook and I was not able to find them.
All right. I'm just working with this, which is from May of a year ago. And H covers nepotism, which is employment of immediate family member. So I guess looking at this, I question whether 2.96.050A1 even needs to be there, since I thought it was addressed in these. So that was one question. That was my main question. I have a couple. I actually did meet with Dr. Aldrich, and there were a couple things I was we were considering deleting. But I guess before I vote on this, I kind of like an answer to that, or it looks like perhaps Mr. Fountain can address it.
Director Fountain.
Mr. Chairman, through you to Councilman Rennie and to the rest of the committee that's here today. We've had some conversation as directors amongst ourselves with some of the same questions that we're duplicating some of the thought process. It's our understanding that Dr. Aldrich is going to be bringing forth some sort of an amendment or a substitution as we go forward with this, but I haven't seen that substitution or amendment. What I'm aware of is that the conversation is very liking to what Dr. Rennie is mentioning. A lot of similarities there, a lot of things that we would have to modify in the handbook or within our rules and regs if we chose to adopt something like this. So we're not in opposition of it, but we'd like to see that substitution. And I think we'd also like to know what we're ultimately trying to accomplish by adopting this at the same time as having the handbook and having the rules and regs.
Thank you. Any questions? Dr. Rennie?
Not for Mr. Fountain. I still have a couple more
Okay.
questions.
Thank you, Director.
Mr.
Ms. Foster, Dr. Rennie, go ahead.
Well, I guess that's the other question I've got. What I'm working off of is a proposed substitute number 12 is, do we all have that copy or am I? Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Mr. Chairman, I'll defer to my colleague from Ward 1, but I think I'd like to make a motion to postpone and give us maybe a couple more weeks to sort this out.
Okay,
That's true, we do not. So when it comes to that point, like I said, I think I'm gonna make a motion to postpone, but if Councilman Laybourne has some questions, I'd be more than happy to wait.
Councilman Labor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Boster, my recollection is that the Assistant City Attorney in your office, who I believe drafted this, brought up statutory considerations that we need to adopt by ordinance a conflict of interest ordinance. Am I correct in that recollection?
Mr. Chairman, through you to Councilman Laybourne. In 1985, the Wyoming Legislature adopted Wyoming Statute 15-1-127, which requires that towns and cities enact a conflict of interest ordinance.
And at this point, this proposed ordinance is an attempt to correct that lack that we have in our ordinances. Is that my understanding?
Mr. Chairman, through you, yes, it's based in part on what the city of Casper did, which was the only other city in town that we found that has adopted an ordinance of this nature.
Thank you.
Any further questions for Attorney Boster? Hearing none, is there any comments from the public? In the room or online? Seeing no comments, may I have a motion, please?
Second,
We have a motion to approve.
Mr. Chairman.
Dr. Rennie.
I would, in view of the fact that this has been state statute 1-127 has been there since 1985, and there's only one city in the city, town, village in the state that has adopted this. It's not like it's an immensely pressing issue, so I would move to postpone for another 2 weeks and try and so that everybody has a copy of the substitute and maybe sort out some of the differences between what the ordinance is and what our rules and regulations say.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion on the move to postpone?
Mr. Chairman,
Councilman Laybourne.
well, this is an important element of the respect and trust in the community with the people that work here, including the council, of course. But it is also a very confusing matter. And I think that any clarification we can gain, whether it's a work session or the review of the possible substitute, that'd be a good thing because ultimately, certainly with those of us on the council, it is a personal choice of whether we choose to recognize a conflict of interest or not. But I believe that the most important thing that I see here is clarity of purpose so that it gives guidance to everyone involved. So that we arrive at something that's pretty clear as to what that might be and how it might be handled by individuals. So I believe that a postponement is in order here. Thank you.
Thank you. Any discussion from the public on the postponement? Director Nemecheck.
Vicky Nemechek, Public Works. I did speak up at the last meeting about this ordinance. Specifically, this ordinance conflicts with the City of Cheyenne Employee Handbook, paragraphs 2.1.1, which is bereavement leave definition of immediate family. 5.2, acceptance of gifts. I believe it states in the employee handbook $25 and $250 in the proposed ordinance. 5.9, conflict of interest, the wording is different than the employee handbook. It also conflicts with the City of Cheyenne Rules and Regulations, paragraph 9H, employee status nepotism, definition of immediate family. And I wondered if it would be grandfathered in. I haven't seen a substitute, so I don't know if all those things have been dealt with, but I do agree that a postponement is appropriate until we can all see the substitute and how it correlates to the employee handbook.
Thank you. Further discussion on the postponement? Anyone online? Hearing none, can we have a vote on the postponement? All those in favor?
Aye.
Those opposed? The recommendation Monday night will be to postpone. Next item.
Number 13, ordinance second reading, amending chapter 15.20 National Electrical Code adopted, Appendix K, International Building Code Administrative Provisions adopted of Title 15, Buildings and Construction of the Municipal Code of the City of Cheyenne, Wyoming, updating the incorporated National Electrical Code provisions as specified.
Staff report, please. On the right. There you go.
Little different. Mr. Chair, members of the council, Anthony Parmerlo, Building Safety Division, City of Cheyenne, Chief Building Official. What we have before us today is the adoption of the 2023 National Electrical Code. This will have a path through council, first reading that already has occurred on June 12th. Today's meeting, this evening, we will have a meeting with, it's an open house meeting for public that will happen and take place at the Kiwanis Building at 6 p.m. this evening. Then we will go to our second reading on June 26th, back to this committee at July 5th, final reading with council on July 10th. State statute requires that jurisdictions must adopt the minimum electrical standards by ordinance or resolution that are adopted by the state of Wyoming. State of Wyoming currently has in fact adopted the 2023 National Electrical Code effective January 1st of 2023 this year. The intent of this is obviously to adopt that code and follow those statutes. Our intent by reading through should be about the 20th of July, maybe the week of the 20th of July that we would adopt that. So we're just slightly behind that 6-month period where we're required to adopt. There are some minor corrections as far as form made by our city attorney's office, which is very standard for what we're doing for ordinances now. And then there are some grammatical corrections that have been made to the ordinance. Only one change has been proposed from the document as it has been published. And that is an amendment to the administration section, which is also adopted through Appendix K in the International Building Code, which is nothing more than administration of the National Electrical Code. So that would be the main changes that we would have. I would stand for any questions.
Thank you. Any questions for staff from the committee? Questions? Dr. Rennie.
Mr. Chairman, just so I understand, what we're proposing is we're adding the red information and obviously deleting the strikeouts in the blue. And those are the changes we're asked to.
That's my understanding. Is that right?
Mr. Chair, through you, Dr. Rennie, that's correct.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Further questions for staff? Any comments from the public in the room or online? Any comments? Hearing none, could we have a motion?
Second.
Moved by Mr. Laybourne, second by Dr. Rennie. Further discussion? Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor signify by saying aye. Those opposed? Recommendation for Monday night will be to approve. Next item, please.
Number 14, ordinance second reading, annexing to the City of Cheyenne, Wyoming, land located northwest and adjacent to the intersection of Thomas Road and Ridge Road.
Staff report, please. Yes, go ahead.
For the record, Connor White, Planning and Development Department. The annexation before you is for a parcel of land that is to the north west, or at the northwest corner of the intersection of Ridge Road and Thomas Road. The property is 100% continuous to city limits and is considered a county pocket. Utilities are readily available. A public hearing was held at the last city council meeting. And the zoning, the establishment for the zone is the next item on the agenda. Staff does recommend approval of this annexation. I'm available for any questions.
Thank you, sir. Any questions from committee? Questions from the committee? Hearing none, is there a developer report? Mr. Perriman.
Bruce Perryman, AVI Engineering. Pretty simple little project here. There's 7 residential lots that abut Thomas Road that are proposed, all to be served by city water and sewer. There's no new right-of-way proposed. All the street improvements are in, with the exception of sidewalk on the north side. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you. Any questions from committee? Any questions from committee? Hearing none, is there any comment from the public, either in the room or online? We do have a comment, Mr. White.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, Michael White. I have a question on, for AVI. When I attended the last meeting, the planning commission, there was some discussion, or if I got my meetings right, there was some discussion about what would happen with the drainage in that area. And I recollect that the city engineer, Mr. Cobb, is trying to work something out. So could Mr. Perryman explain that a little bit, please? Thank
Mr. Perriman.
There's 2 phases of the drainage. The initial short-term solution is that the far east lot would contain 100% of the runoff from this development until such time as the city makes some upgrades further to the east that are in motion at this time. Once that happens, then there'll be a water quality feature that will allow water to come in, get cleaned, and then pass it on to the city system that would be further to the east and enhanced over time. So there won't be any construction on lot 7 until such time as all those city improvements have been completed to the east.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Further comments from the public, in the room or online? Any comments? All right. Hearing none, could we have a motion, please?
Second.
A motion by Dr. Rennie, a second by Councilman Laybourne. Discussion from the committee,
Mr. Chairman,
Councilman Laybourne.
I have some questions from Mr. Perriman.
Sir.
I understand the nature of this development area and the rectifying of the mistakes that were made in Thomas Heights. But I'm unaware of any temporary detention ponds other than what's proposed here. Could you give me an example of other temporary retention ponds? Well, actually, that is a retention pond, correct?
Yeah, I believe this is a unique situation, Councilman Laybourne. It's in conjunction with the direction the city engineer wanted this project to proceed as. So we are containing the flows on site until such times as they can be released.
But we don't really know when that development will occur. And I'm just noting it's very unusual in this case, and I certainly hope we can proceed with the effort to rectify the mistakes that were made in that drainage. So just curious about a temporary retention.
I would-
pond.
Yeah, I would direct you to have discussions with the city engineer on that, because we're We're following his lead on how to make this project move forward with 6 lots, reserving the 7th for detention until such times as it can be developed later on. Thank you.
Any further questions from the committee? All right, we have a motion and a second. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed? The recommendation for Monday night will be to approve. Next item, please.
Number 15, ordinance second reading, amending the official zoning map of the city of Cheyenne, establishing the zoning classification of MR, medium density residential for land being annexed to the city of Cheyenne located northwest of and adjacent to the intersection of Thomas Road and Ridge Road.
Staff report, please.
Again, for the record, Connor White, Planning and Development Department. The zoning map amendment is to establish a zone for the previous annexation that we just discussed. When a property is annexed, it does need a city zone. The applicant is proposing the MR medium density residential zone to allow for 7 single-family homes to be developed. The MR zone does exist to the south, the east, and the west. Planning Commission heard this item at their June 5th meeting and did recommend approval of this zoning map amendment. Staff also recommends approval, and I'm available for any questions.
Thank you. Questions from the committee? Questions from the committee? Hearing none, is there a report from the developer, please? Mr. Perrin.
Bruce Perryman, AVI. This project is being proposed as MR zoning, which is consistent with the surrounding neighborhood. And it will allow for 7 single-family residential units. Thank you.
Any questions from the committee? Hearing none. Comments from the public, either in the room or online. Hello.
Rebecca Murchie, 3222 Thomas Road. I just wanted to indicate that I am in support of the MR designation for this piece of property. It is consistent with the current surrounding properties. One of the concerns that I wanted to express, though, was in the planning commission meeting, there had been talk about putting a road through there, taking up one of the properties and putting a road through. I would be very much opposed to that. It would raise traffic and safety concerns. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any further comments?
Elizabeth Staple, 3305 Thomas Road. I just want to say that Rebecca spoke very well and she spoke my mind completely. And I agree with her 100%. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further comments? How about online? Any hands raised? All right. May I have a motion, please?
Mr. Chairman,
Dr.
I move to approve the ordinance designating the area as MR.
Is there a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any additional comments from the committee? Hearing none. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? The recommendation for Monday night will be to approve. Next item, please.
Number 16, ordinance second reading, annexing to the city of Cheyenne, Wyoming, land located south of and adjacent to Rollins Street, east of Cleveland Avenue.
Staff report, please. Boy.
For the record, Connor White, Planning and Development Department. The property is located east of the intersection of Rollins Street and Cleveland Avenue, and it's south of and adjacent to Rollins Street. The property is 100% continuous to city limits and is a county pocket. Utilities are readily available, and a public hearing was held at the last city council meeting. The zoning for this property is the next item on the agenda. Staff does recommend approval of this annexation, and I'm available for any questions.
Questions for staff from the committee? Dr. Rennie.
Mr. Chairman, just looking at the map, so the 2 lots to the east and west are already within the city that's correct.
Mr. Chair, through you, that is correct.
Right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Further questions from the committee? Questions? Hearing none, is there a developer report?
Mr. Chair, I do not see our applicant's agent here in the room. It is Jack Studley, who is the city's surveyor. But I do not see him down here.
Great, thank you. Dr. Rennie?
And would this be a county island? Did the city and with Mr. Studley being agent, did the city initiate this or did the landowner?
Mr. Chair, through you, my understanding is that the landowner initiated it. So when Mr. Studley was brought back on as the city surveyor, he did let the city engineer know that he had a couple projects still from when he was in the private sector he was still working on. And this was one of them. So that's how he acted as the agent for the owner on this. But it was basically owner initiated for this project.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Since we don't have a developer here, is there public comment on this item, either in the room or online? Public comment? Public comment. Thank you. Hearing none, is there a motion?
So moved.
Second,
Moved by Mr. Laybourne, second by Dr. Rennie. Discussion from the committee.
Mr. Chairman.
Councilman Laybourne.
Well, I'm particularly glad to see this parcel coming into the city. I recall visiting with the landowner many years ago about issues in that area and how effectively can be developed. And so this is another piece of our effort in that Sunnyside addition to clear up these pockets and to make a difference there. I would say that I hope that we can live up to the city's responsibilities on Rollins Street there. Because I believe that paving those streets is important to the whole redevelopment of them. And I know there are issues there, but this is a good thing, and I hope that it'll lead to other good things for the city and for the property owners. Thank you.
Thank you. Further comments from the committee? Hearing none. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The recommendation for Monday night will be to approve. Next item, please.
Number 17, ordinance second reading, amending the official zoning map of the city of Cheyenne, establishing the zoning classification of MR medium density residential for land being annexed to the city of Cheyenne located south of and adjacent to Rollins Street and east of Cleveland Avenue.
Staff report, Mr. White.
For the record, Connor White, Planning and Development Department. The zoning map amendment is to establish a zone for the previous annexation that we had just discussed. The applicant is proposing to zone it MR medium density residential, which is the zone that it is in the county. The MR zone does exist to the south, the east, and the west. To the north is actually zoned public and I believe is owned by the city. Planning Commission heard this item at their June 5th meeting and did recommend approval of this zoning map amendment. And staff also recommends approval. I'm available for any questions.
Thank you. Questions from the committee? Question? Hearing none. We know there's not a developer here, so we'll go straight to the public. Any comments from the public, either in the room or online? Comments? Hearing none. Could I have a motion, please?
So moved.
second,
Moved by Councilman Laybourne, second by Dr. Rennie. Any further discussion from the committee? Discussion? Hearing none. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Recommendation for Monday night will be to approve. Next item, please.
Number 18, ordinance second reading, amending the official zoning map of the city of Cheyenne, establishing the zoning classification of AG agricultural for land being annexed to the city of Cheyenne located southwest of and adjacent to the intersection of Holland Court and Ridge Road.
Staff report, please. Mr. White.
Again, for the record, Connor White, Planning and Development Department. I'll be up here quite a bit. The zoning map amendment proposes signing a zone of AG agriculture for 10.7 acres of land that's located southwest of the intersection of Ridge Road and Holland Court. The land is currently occupied with one residential unit in rural residential development pattern. The proposed AG zone allows for a variety of agricultural uses and can be used as a holding zone until until more concrete development actions are proposed. This property is within city limits already, but it was not assigned a zone when it was annexed, so it is currently unzoned. As mentioned, the AG zone can be used as a holding zone until the developer determines what they would like to develop the property with. This is a staff initiated zoning. This has not been requested by the developer. This is staff initiated because the property currently doesn't have a zone and a new zone wasn't proposed. So staff initiated the zoning to AG to give it a holding zone, so it has a city zone as it is in city limits. Again, the planning commission heard this item at their June 5th meeting and did recommend approval of the zoning map amendment. Staff also recommends approval, and I'm available for any questions.
Thank you. Questions from the committee? Questions? Questions? Hearing no questions, we do not have a developer involved with this, so we'll go to public comment. Public comment on this zoning change. Yes, sir. Mr. Steve.
Chairman, committee, Jason Stephen, Bedrock Development. I guess representing Bedrock Development, I guess everybody knows that this wasn't the zone we wanted, but I guess in light of not having the other zone, this would probably be the best alternative, at least for now. We would still like to develop the project into something, more suitable. But I guess until then, I'll become a farmer, so.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Stephen. Further public comment? In the room or online? Public comment? Yes, ma'am.
Hi, Rebecca Murchie again, 3222 Thomas Road. I'm not opposed to the city's recommendation for AG zoning. But just for the record, I am kind of curious and perplexed as to why the developer hasn't requested an alternate zone at this time. It appeared that the company was very eager to move forward with development, and not getting the property zone would seem to delay this process. Thank you.
Further public comment? Yes, ma'am.
Good afternoon. I'm not opposed either.
Can you identify yourself?
Oh, I'm sorry. Elizabeth Stable, 3305 Thomas Road. I'm not opposed to this zoning. And I'm also curious as to the delay, but I am not opposed at all to this zoning. And I thank you for your time.
Thank you. Further comments? Comments? Hearing none, do I have a motion, please?
Second.
Moved by Dr. Rennie, second by Councilman Laybourne. Discussion from the committee. Mr. Laybourne. No? Okay, I'm sorry. Discussion? Discussion? Hearing none. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? The recommendation for Monday night will be to approve the zoning. Next item, please.
Number 19, ordinance second reading, amending the official zoning map of the city of Cheyenne, changing the zoning classification from LI light industrial and MR medium density residential to MR medium density residential for land located on lots 14 and 15 of Christensen Park.
Staff report, please.
For the record, Connor White, Planning and Development Department. The zoning map amendment proposes changing the zone of roughly 0.65 acres for a parcel of land that is just basically north of the intersection of West 28th and Cribben Avenue. The applicant proposes changing the property from being light industrial, and it's also portion of it is medium density residential already, so it's split zoning, and they would like to rezone the whole thing to MR medium density residential. The proposed development is for 6 lots for duplexes. So it'll follow the same pattern that is just to the north of this property. It's the same development. So there will be 6 residential units for a total of 3 duplexes. The MR zone does exist to the north and to the east. And then as I mentioned, it's part of the same development, just to the north. This is their phase 2 of their project. So it's finishing out that development. The planning commission did hear this item at their June 5th meeting and does recommend approval of the zoning map amendment. Staff also recommends approval, and I'm available for any questions.
Thank you, Mr. White. Questions from the committee? Questions for staff? Questions for staff? Hearing none, is there a developer report? Yes, sir.
Good afternoon, Chairman, members of the committee, Trey Rennie, AVI Engineering Agent. Not much to add to Mr. White's staff report. Just that the only reason this wasn't included in the first phase of the development was that there was a pre-existing metal building that was industrial in nature. That was the reason for the split zoning of this lot. So now just trying to make it all MR and finish out the development. I am available for any questions.
Thank you. Questions from the committee? Questions? Hearing none, public comment either in the room or online. Any public comment on this zoning change? None? Hearing none, could I have a motion, please?
Mr. Chairman,
Dr. Rennie.
I want to comment since my son is representing this. When he was hired by AVI, I asked the city attorney at the time if I had any conflict on AVI projects, and it was determined at that time, no, I did not. And as a result, I have voted, unless there was one he directly represented, I've always voted on AVI contracts. I do want to, or projects, I do want to point out that he doesn't receive anything additional, whether this goes through or not. So there's no personal benefit to him. However, if there's a perception, until I saw Dr. Aldrich walk in, I thought, well, I'm not going to recuse myself on this one because then we would lose our quorum. And I want to at least keep it going on a recuse myself Monday. So I will go ahead and vote on this to keep it going unless Dr. Aldrich wants to sit in for me during the discussion and vote. And then I can come back to the meeting. So however the rest of you would like to handle that, I'm fine with it.
Mr. Laborn, any comments?
Well, I'm familiar with this project and I think it's a benefit to the neighborhood. And I understand why it was split. So I'm in favor of moving for approval. I think it's up to Dr. Aldrich if she wants to sit in, but I don't see there be any problem there if she chooses to do that.
I still need a motion. Worst case scenario, there's no motion.
Okay,
Good, mate. I mean, if none of you see a problem with me seconding it and voting, then I'll stay here, but if my colleagues perceive a conflict, then I would rather sit down.
Dr. Rennie, this is just a recommending body. The
I understand.
Is Monday night. I don't perceive a conflict. I don't know how Councilman Labor would feel.
well, considering what Dr. Rennie mentioned earlier, it seems to me that he believes that it's best that he not vote on this today. So I certainly don't want to do anything that could be in conflict with that.
Okay.
No,
Dr. Aldrich, would you mind joining our committee for the remainder? We're near the end. I'd like for the record to show that Dr. Aldrich, Councilman Aldrich joined our committee meeting at 12:44, and we are on item number 19. Thank you, Dr. Aldrich. I'd also like the record to show that Dr. Rennie recused himself. Not necessarily conflict, but he doesn't want any issues. So we're on item 19. We've had the staff report, the developer report, the public comment. I'm to the point where I need a motion, please.
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Councilman Laborn, seconded by Dr. Aldrich. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Hearing none, the recommendation for Monday night will be to approve. Next item, please, and please ask Dr. Rennie to come back. Yeah, you can stay. We're almost.
Number 20, ordinance second reading, amending section 2.4.2 annexations of the Unified Development Code and creating section 2.2.8 assigned zoning, clarifying city zone assignment processes in concert with annexations and when removing city zone districts.
Staff report, please. Mr. White.
For the record, Connor White, Planning and Development Department. The text amendment before you is to add a new section to the UDC for assigned zoning. What this amendment does is it basically has staff look at what the underlying county zone is when a property is proposed to be annexed to staff, and then recommends what the closest representation of a city zone would be to that county zone for the property. So with this section, staff would be assigning the zoning. The applicant no longer needs to submit for a zoning map amendment unless they do not like what the assigned zone is. What I have up on the screen and what is also in the packet is basically what our policy document would be that basically shows what the county zone is and what the most analogous city zone would be to that zone based on the uses allowed in the county and based on the uses allowed within the city. I should mention that it can be challenging to get the exact zone. So for example, the county has a mixed use zone. The city has 3 different mixed use zonings. We have mixed use residential, mixed use business, and mixed use employment. But based on what the county allows in their mixed use zone, staff believes that the mixed use residential city zone best represents that zoning, which is why we have it in the policy document. But again, with any of these zones, there's going to be 1 or 2 uses that may or may not be allowed based on if it's in the county or in the city. What we tried to do is basically look what is the closest representation for the assigned zoning. So with the assigned zoning, as I mentioned, it's basically what happens is the applicant, and actually I'll just go to this. It's not the prettiest flow chart. I just threw something together to kind of show how it kind of runs through the process, but the applicant will submit for the annexation application. Right now, what the applicant has to do, and we have plenty of good examples on today's agenda, they basically have to also submit for a zoning map amendment on top of the annexation because it has to have a city zone. And they're basically proposing what that zone would be. With this section, the annexation application gets submitted, staff reviews the area being annexed, looks at that parcel, looks at what it is in the county, and then goes to our policy document and basically assigns it the zone based on what the county zone is. If the applicant does not like what that assigned zoning is, then they can submit for the zoning map amendment on top of basically these other 2 ordinances that would go forward. So with the zoning assignment, for example, on today's agenda, we had the property that's over on Rollins. The property was looking to be annexed. They also had to submit a zoning map amendment at this time. Adding this section removes them having to submit that application and pay that fee. We would look at it. It's MR in the county. We're going to assign it MR into the city. That still goes, basically assigned zoning will still go to planning commission, still goes through the public process. So the assigned zoning will go to planning commission. The annexation goes to city council. At planning commission, we discuss the assigned zoning. That gets a recommendation that then goes to the governing body with the annexation. If the developer doesn't like what that assigned zoning is, I guess let's use the example of the other annexation we had today where it was on Thomas and Ridge. In the county, that is A1. We would be basically assigning it AG through this process with the assigned zoning. The applicant wants to develop it with 7 single-family homes. They want MR zoning. So they also submit the zoning map amendment on top of basically their annexation application like they already do. So when all of these get to council, what I have at the bottom basically and what I think I also have something in the packet. I think you have a draft agenda or like a template agenda of what it would look like. Basically, you'll have the annexation gets heard first, the assigned zoning gets heard second, and then the zoning map amendment gets heard third. So the governing body would hopefully approve the annexation, then hopefully approve the assigned zoning, and then depending on if the governing body wants to approve the zoning map amendment, they have that choice. If they don't approve the zoning map amendment, you've approved the assigned zoning, so it defaults to the assigned zoning. If you approve the zoning map amendment, that basically overrides the assigned zoning. So you'll have basically the annexation, the assigned zoning, and then right after it, you have that zoning map amendment, which then takes place or takes over what the assigned zone would have been. So this, in a way, this does benefit the developer. If they like the assigned zone, they don't have to pay an extra application fee. It really doesn't add that much more work for staff. Yes, it is. If they don't like the zone, there is now 3 ordinances on the agenda rather than 2. But with the way the assigned zoning works, we have one review criteria, and that basically looks at what is the uses that are allowed in the county, what is the underlying county zone, and what does it match within the city. That is the one review criteria. And then we have that policy document, which helps us narrow that quicker. But just in case the policy document changes or the zoning changes in the county, or they add zones, we can update that policy document, but it's still in that criteria specifically says that we review it based on the allowed uses. And then we try to figure out what that zone best represents. Planning Commission did hear this item at their June 5th meeting, and they did recommend approval of this text amendment. And then staff does recommend approval of this text amendment as well. I am available for any questions. I'll try to explain anything I do need to. There was a lot of discussion at Planning Commission. I hope this better clarifies kind of the process and how it works. This doesn't just go to it doesn't go where staff just basically, we snap our fingers and it has a zone. It still goes through the public process. It still has public comment, still has to go to Planning Commission, still has to come before the governing body for approval. So it still works the same as any other ordinance. What this does though is make it so that hopefully with any annexation, we will always have a zone for it. We should never have an annexation where there is not a zone like our current situation we have. And then I know there was, I guess I should bring up, there was some concerns, I think from the public and potentially even some Planning Commission members of, well, what if the policy document says it's AG and staff decides, well, we think it should be, what came up was NR3. Well, I would hope that as we went through Planning Commission and City Council, you all realize that staff made a huge mistake and basically corrects that. But with the way that that criteria is, we should be reviewing it based on the fact of what those uses are and what correlates from the county to the city zone. And with that, I'm available for any questions.
Thank you, sir. Questions from the committee? Questions or comments from the committee? All right, hearing none. There is no developer on this, so we'll go straight to public comment. Public comment in the room or online? Mr. White.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, Michael White. I'd like to kind of go back to what Connor was saying. On June 5th, 2023 at the commission meeting, item H and item I were left to where that discussion could talk about the issues that many of us had in the room. And when I left the room, I was still confused. So I asked, I think Connor explained some of that pretty well, but what my concern was is if the fact that the public would still have the ability to comment. And I believe Connor has explained that. Thank you.
Thank you. Further comments from the public in the room or online? comments? Hearing none, may I have a motion, please?
Mr. Chairman, I'll move to approve.
Second, is there a second? Yeah, sure.
Second.
We have a motion to approve from Dr. Rennie and a second from Dr. Aldrich. Discussion from the committee. Councilman Laybourne.
Mr. Chairman, I attended that planning commission meeting and I certainly recognize what Mr. White's talking about. When you talk about confusion and application, that was a real difficult process for the commission as well as anyone that was intended to determine exactly what the intent was here and why it's a benefit to the city and particularly a benefit to the individuals who are surrounding that development, proposed development. I think that I certainly wasn't convinced then, and I'm not convinced now that this is a proper approach. I would point out that with all due respect for the planning department and its director and staff, this is another case of the staff and the director having approval of items that have a lot of consequences. And therefore, I don't believe that this is appropriate at this time. And I'm going to be voting no. And I believe that our existing process, imperfect though it might be, is better than having this kind of a choice in the office itself. I think that that's a matter of application as it has been in these other items we dealt with today. And therefore I'm a no.
Thank you. Further comments? Dr. Rennie.
Mr. Chairman, my colleague's comment brought a question to my mind then. Is it possible that I can ask Mr. White another question?
Certainly. Mr. White, if you could help us.
So, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to know currently if a applicant comes in and they are requesting a zone that our staff does not think is appropriate in that area, I presume there's some negotiation and eventually you arrive at a zoning that's maybe a little more acceptable to our staff and still acceptable to the applicant. Is that an accurate perception?
Mr. White.
Mr. Chair, through you. Yes, so right now, the way that we have it is most times when we have an annexation or we have any project where they're looking at changing the zone, we usually have pre-application meetings where we do discuss what is the project, what is the proposed use, and what would be the best zoning that staff would most likely recommend approval of moving forward as it goes through the process. So there is that discussion. Sometimes there is the negotiation because the applicant might want something, but staff says that doesn't really match the existing area or it doesn't meet what we believe will match for their project. And there might be a lesser zone that will still accomplish what they want to do. So there is already that where then they have to submit the application for the zoning map amendment with the annexation or with any zone change itself and come through that process.
So, Mr. Chairman, would those pre-meetings, pre-approval meetings essentially go away with this process or would?
Mr. Chair, through you, those would not. With any project, we always recommend a pre-application meeting. Basically what all this does is basically if for example, with the Rollins property, they were looking to annex, the county zone is MR. With this, we would just assign it the MR zone because that matches. They would not have to submit basically and pay an additional fee for the zoning map amendment. If they don't like what that underlying county zone is and they want to propose a different zone, then they basically propose that different zone through our current zoning map amendment process. And basically still, you'll see the same exact things we already have today. The only difference is that we add the assigned zoning to make sure the property has a zone.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much for allowing me to ask those questions. And it seems like it will save some time for the developer and our staff and perhaps us too. So I will support it.
We're a little bit out of order, but I see the planning director. Would you like to make a comment?
And Chair, members of the committee, I just wanted to make one quick comment. I do have a 1 o'clock that I'm supposed to pop on, so I'm going to step out after the comment. I won't drop the mic though. But this table here, yes, it's a preventive action for what very rarely happens in the city. What we will have is the ability to have a base zone so we don't get stuck in the situation which we have unzoned property. There are 2 different avenues we could go, and there's different trends in the planning world that are occurring throughout the nation in western states like Montana, Washington, and Oregon and Idaho, where they are more tied to the land use plan. We took the lesser, the more conservative approach, and we're assigning the best matching zone districts. So it is proposed to have a zone that echoes what is currently zoned today. So for example, agriculture in the county, we're looking at agriculture in the city, single family in the county, single family in the city, industrial in the county, industrial in the city. That's what's going to be on this. It will be a document that will be available to everybody. A lot of states are jumping ahead at the statute level. Most recently, Montana just passed legislation as part of their affordable housing program. They had 5 individual bills that moved forward. Those give a lot more weight to the land use plans where there are multifamily or density elements. So for example, on some of our most recent development, where it was proposed for the NR3, if there were a chart that were more based on the comprehensive plan, which calls for density and multifamily, we could have gone the route of trying to fit it in with the land use category. So those are the 2 options that we had presented. But what we chose to go with was the more conservative option, which did maintain the status quo in the neighborhood. So just wanted to let you know that that was something that came through in our evaluation of creation of that table.
Thank you, sir. We have a motion and a second committee discussion. Dr. Aldrich.
Chairman Seagrave, I just wanted to say, I also attend that planning commission meeting. And of all of the things that were discussed there, this was actually the one that was the most understandable. And I felt like it makes sense. And I got the impression, and I think that's been confirmed by Mr. White today, that this isn't something that happens really commonly. This is unusual, and that I guess I will be voting in support of this today because it seems to make common sense, and it seems to take some of the burden off of having a situation arise like what we've had occur. So thank you.
Thank you. Further discussion from the committee on the motion. Discussion? Hearing none. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? No. The recommendation for Monday night will be to approve. Next item, please.
Number 21, ordinance second reading, amending section 2.2.1.c.5 and 2.2.2.c.6 of the Unified Development Code, UDC, amending protest petitions for zoning map amendments and plan developments.
Do we have a staff report, please? Mr. White. Very
For the
popular today.
Yep, I'm filling in for my colleague Seth Lloyd. So
Thank you.
for the record, Connor White, Planning and Development Department. This is another text amendment, again, heavily discussed at Planning Commission. With this text amendment, the ordinance that you have in front of you is going to look different than what is in staff's staff report. And the reason for that is that when the Planning Commission made their motion, they made the recommendation to approve what is in the ordinance before you. But they modified what staff was recommending in their staff report. So in the staff report, staff was basically recommending 3 different options, basically. Option A is to basically leave the section as is, not make any amendments to it. Option B is to add a provision that a protest petition needs to be on a city, basically a city formal protest petition provided by the city. And then option C is to basically amend the whole section to just reference state statute. What Planning Commission ended up recommending approval for is basically they took option C and option B and kind of smushed them together. So what they're recommending approval is to reference state statute, but then also add at the end of that language, the formal protest shall be filed on a form provided by the city, is basically what they added. So a couple of things. I know this was a heavy discussion at Planning Commission. So I just want to try to clarify things as much as I can. What a protest petition does, which I believe council is aware, and really the only thing it does is change the final vote on any ordinance from needing 6 affirmative to 8 affirmative votes. That is all a protest petition does. With the recommended change with this text amendment and referencing state statute, the only thing that will change is it slightly changes how that 20% of the signatures is determined. But it does not change the fact that you still need, if a protest petition is found valid, that you need 8 affirmative votes by the governing body on a third and final vote, basically for any item. This change does not prohibit citizens from coming and voicing their opinions at public meetings, because that's not what a protest petition is basically for. Any citizen can come to a public meeting and basically voice their opposition for anything. With this change, like I said, all it does is mirror state statute. It cleans up the text in the UDC. When the UDC was adopted in 2012, they tried to take that portion of state statute and basically write it in how they felt it was being conveyed by state statute. So this would just basically clean it up and just mirror state statute and make things cleaner and easier to go off of basically one version rather than trying to determine 2 different sets of 20%, because there is a little bit of a difference there. And I will mention that basically this text amendment does go with the previous text amendment in a way. With the previous text amendment, should the governing body approve that, then really all this text amendment does is reference state statute. It doesn't change how a protest petition will work in the future. You can still protest a zoning map amendment that is submitted by the applicant. So in the example for the assigned zoning, you have the annexation, the assigned zoning, and that zoning map amendment. If the assigned zoning is AG and the developer wants NR3, that's a zoning map amendment, you can still protest that. So there would still be 8 affirmative votes needed at the end of the day with the third reading. If the governing body doesn't approve the assigned zoning, but approves this text amendment, then basically the way state statute reads, you can only protest the change in regulations. So if there's a property being annexed, that's an establishment of regulations. You wouldn't be able to protest that. So that's kind of how these 2 text amendments do go together. But if the governing body is going to approve the assigned zoning, approving this protest text, the protest provision text amendment does not change how protest petitions would work at all. Besides mirroring state statute and having to be on a city provided form. Planning Commission did hear, as I mentioned, Planning Commission did hear this at June 5th at their meeting. There was a vote of 4-2 in approval, and they did make an amendment to what staff was recommending, where they basically took, as I mentioned, option C and option B and kind of put them together, which is the ordinance that you have before you.
Mr. White, before I ask the committee for questions, I just want to make sure what you're recommending. Are you recommending we accept B and C? Is that what staff is recommending?
Mr. Chair, through you, staff recommends approval of the ordinance before you that Planning Commission had recommended. So not specifically what's in the staff report, but the actual ordinance that's before you that takes planning commission's recommendation. And that's what staff recommends approval of. I am available for any questions.
Thank you. Questions for staff from the committee, please. Dr. Aldrich.
Thank you, Chairman Seagrave. So again, I was there at the Planning Commission and listened to all of the conversation. What I didn't understand at that time, which I'm just seeing now, and maybe I just hadn't read it closely the first time, was that the what you're referring to as C, which was the referring back to state statute, is that it would change right now. Our city ordinance calculates the 140 feet from a proposed annexed property to include right of ways and easements, that type of thing. It's as the crow flies. However, the one that's based in state statute does not calculate that 140 feet the same way. The only thing they exclude for is an intervening street or alley. It's not included. So it seems to me that especially in the one that we're talking about, where we have a easement or a right of way that, for instance, had a gas line, that 140 feet in our current city's ordinance would be calculated in that 140 feet, but in the state statute, well, I guess it would be included there because it's not a street or an alley, right? So.
Mr. Chair, through you. So yes, it wouldn't include the easement, but it would eliminate the road. So with state statute, it's basically taking out, if the right of way is 100 feet, it basically eliminates that from that calculation. So in a sense, you might actually be getting more parcels within that allowed 20% with state statute than you would with what is currently in the UDC.
Thank you.
Further questions? Dr. Rennie.
Mr. Chairman, so just so I understand, is the 20% figured on area or on population in the area, or both?
Mr. White.
I believe state statute is based on the area.
That's okay.
And I think that might be the same way it's referenced in the UDC as well, how it's the 20%, or actually the
So-
20% might just be the 20% within the 140-foot range.
So one large landowner could trigger the 20%. Is that correct?
Mr. White.
I believe so. That I might have to double check on, and I could probably get answers for you for next Monday.
Okay, and Mr. Chairman, I have one other question, and this might be more for our attorney. I realize the 20% figure comes out of state statute. If we were to want to make that percentage higher, do we have the ability to do that? Or I know we can't do things more lax than state statute.
Mr. Chairman, through you to Dr. Rennie, we can be more restrictive than state statute, but not less. I would determine that's more restrictive.
That's what I thought, but I wanted to make sure. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Further questions for staff from the committee? Questions? Hearing none, may I have a motion, please? I'm sorry, public comment. May I have public comment, please? In the room or online? You can tell I'm a rookie.
Chairman Committee, Jason Stephen, Bedrock Development again. First, I wanted to say that I'd just like to speak in favor of the specific city produced protest petition, and as opposed to what happened in our case where the protest petition was just put together by owners in the area, and I felt was very misleading as to what was being proposed. It was more about the project that we were proposing, the protest was, and not about the zoning that we were doing. And I think that can be very misleading to other individuals who are seeing that petition and are actually signing that petition, especially if it's not 100% accurate. So I think that, I don't know that it would have made that big a difference in my case, but I think moving forward, that would be a very positive thing, is to control that petition and make sure that that petition accurately represent what's actually being voted on by city council and what needs to, what is able to be protested and what is not able to be protested. So that's number one. And then following state statute, I also agree with that. So I think there is a little bit of conflict in the way the UDC, just kind of, but how the UDC addresses those protests and the 20% rule. Right now, if you were to say, at least how I interpret it, and Connor may be able to clarify this, but if you had 4 property owners around a specific property that's being rezoned, and one of those property owners, regardless of its size, were to protest, that would be more than 20%. Because I believe the way that the UDC is written is it's number of properties, not size of, not the total size, not the total acreage. So I think that if you were to have that be the amount of land, 20% ownership, that would be a fair representation as opposed to the actual number of property owners. And, yeah, that's it.
Thank you, Mr. Stephen. Further comments from the public? Yes, ma'am.
Good afternoon, Elizabeth Staple, 3305 Thomas Road. I take exception to being compared to other states. And I've listened to 2 meetings where we're compared to 22 other states. And we're Wyoming, and we're an independent thinkers. And as far as I know, we're not a banana republic, and we follow the laws of Wyoming and we don't change them. And I just am really grateful for your thoughts and for your perceptions and for your care. And I thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. Further comments in the room or online? Yes, ma'am.
Rebecca Murchie, 3222 Thomas Road. And I apologize for reading this, but I can't keep my thoughts together any other way. When the proposal to modify the supermajority vote was initially presented, the purpose was stated to prevent an annexed property from going unannexed or from going unzoned. That issue would be addressed by the earlier proposal, where it would default back to a comparable zone that already existed. The current proposal to change the process of protest positions feels like an attempt to minimize the input of local residents. Not being able to state on the petition the reason for the protest takes away the residents' rights to express their opinion. For example, in regards to the NR3 zoning, my opposition was to the high-density apartment proposal and not to the NR3 zoning. If it had been for a school or a church, I and many of my neighbors would not have protested. That would have been an okay use of the property in our minds. It was stated several times that the information on the petition was inaccurate, although those inaccuracies have never really been clarified. The information was taken directly from the initial meeting at AVI, and we followed the guidelines that were provided by the city for submitting a protest petition. When this whole process began, I was naive enough to believe that the council representatives for our district would support our views once those views were presented, even if they did not agree with us. That was not the reality. There needs to be a process for residents' voices to carry some weight. The protest petition provided that means the persons making the zoning decisions do not have to live with the outcome. The local residents do. Doing away with or modifying the ability of protest petitions to trigger a supermajority vote would impact the public welfare of the areas in question. It is said in the information provided that staff prefers option C, and I guess that has been modified to a combination of option B and C. It further stated that a few select owners of land near a requested zoning map amendment proposal can unduly affect the outcome of an amendment that is desired by the community as a whole. There were more than a few landowners on the petition. There were 90, although they weren't in that 140-foot zone. And we were not even able to contact all of the people in that residential area. The community as a whole that was presented at the meetings in favor of NR3 were developers, realtors, and Chamber of Commerce members, all entities that would benefit from, but not be directly impacted on a daily basis from the proposed development. Please support the right of local citizens to have a voice that carries some weight in measures that directly impact their safety, health, and welfare. Thank you for your time. Thank you for listening.
Thank you. Further comments from the public? In the room or online, please? Comments? Hearing none, may I have a motion, please?
Mr. Chairman, I move to approve.
Is there a second? We have a motion, but no second. Therefore, there will be no recommendation for Monday night. We move on to the next item.
Mr. Chairman, I am going to leave at this point.
Okay, let the record show that Dr. Rennie is leaving the meeting at 1:21 PM.
I want to thank Councilwoman Aldrich for filling in for me so that you still have an agenda.
Absolutely. Thank you, Dr. Aldrich. And we have one item left, number 23, please.
23, resolution approving water services by outside user agreement for properties to be known as Iron Horse Third Filing, Laramie County, Wyoming, generally located southeast of West Riding Club Road and Hines Boulevard.
Staff report, please. Yes, sir.
Frank Strong with the Cheyenne Board of Public Utilities. I guess I'll fill in because I know Charles had to leave. Iron Horse did submit in writing for another 2-week postponement because they were not available to make this meeting and they're still trying to resolve some of the issues they have. I'm happy to answer any questions you might have to the best of my ability.
Any questions from the committee for staff? Questions? Hearing none, is there a developer report or a developer that would like to comment? Nope. Is that the developer?
Mr. Buckley, you should be able to unmute yourself.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. Can you hear me all right?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. And I apologize. Just strange timing. Our management team and ownership folks were not able to be there today. My name is Lucas Buckley. I'm one of the general partners, though, in the development. I know that this has been a topic of some conversation, and we certainly appreciate the council and everyone, staff, et cetera, that's been involved. Again, simply asking for a couple of extra weeks. We do think there are very productive conversations that can be had, but unfortunately with timing this summer and some pre-planned obligations, we weren't able to do that in the prior 2 weeks. So we would ask just for that additional time, hopefully to have some very productive conversations.
Thank you, Mr. Buckley. Any questions for the developer from the committee? Questions for the developer? Councilman Laybourne.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Buckley, what sort of communication do you conceive of happening in that 2-week postponement specifically?
Absolutely, Mr. Chair, through you, Councilman Laybourne. I think there's been some talk about potentially trying to iron out a plan where we could secure the outside user agreement and also satisfy some of the city's concerns, one relating to water. And as I understand it through the Board of Public Utilities, there is water set aside for this, not this specifically, but these sorts of outside user agreements and developments north of Cheyenne. And two, also potentially addressing some of the concerns potentially through a mill levy or something similar that would be set up through the water development that we have currently. to satisfy some of the concerns that the city has with its loss of tax base. Sort of this idea that when folks are moving out to or living in the county, but still using city services, that is a net draw on the city. And I think we've spoken with folks in the county, the Board of Public Utilities, and the mayor a couple of weeks ago about maybe ways to alleviate that burden so that a project like this could still make some sense and potentially still move forward through an outside user agreement. Potentially also use that as a bit of a template, of course, in any given request that you all might have before you. You need to make your own decisions on the merits, but maybe a template for projects like this, what may or may not work in the future.
And so, Mr. Buckley, would that come in a matter of text or a matter of an opportunity to meet with and discuss the proponents of this project?
And Mr. Chair, through you, Councilman Laybourne, I think we're open to anything, of course, that the council would like. Certainly happy to have written communications, but I think what we found most productive is face-to-face communications, an ability to kind of address those concerns that I know you may have.
Thank you.
Further questions from the committee for the developer? Hearing none. Public comment on the 2-week postponement. Public comment in the room? Online? I will. Before we can vote on the postponement, I will need a motion, please. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Moved by Councilman Laybourne, second by Dr. Aldrich. Is there a motion to postpone for 2 weeks? Councilman Laybourne?
Mr. Chairman, I had the opportunity recently to meet with the staff of the Board of Public Utilities and learn more about their approach to this matter and how this might possibly, would definitely affect many elements of our water future. And so I welcome the opportunity to learn more about this, but it seems to me that we have a very unique and important matter here before us that has implications not only for this project, but for that ranchette area of North Cheyenne and our ability to deliver water in the city and how that would occur. So I speak in favor of the postponement, but I'm very concerned that this matter is going before the Board of Public, has gone before the Board of Public Utilities. It is before us now with very little understanding, I think, of the public of the possible effects of this kind of outside user agreement, which is unique in the case of the proposal they have here is very interesting to me in terms of that level of groundwater that is being accessed by those wells and the contamination it might receive. This is a big question. And it is one that definitely has impacts for all of the people in Cheyenne that use water. And that is difficult, certainly for me, to make this decision knowing that our water system has some very unique characteristics of the usage of Colorado River Basin water and the possibility that what happens in that vast, complicated situation could come to us as something that would have a tremendous effect. So I expressed my concerns at the last meeting we had of the Public Service Committee, and I appreciated the opportunity to spend some time with the with the BOPU staff was very interesting. And I think that it also ties into something we've discussed. And I see that Mr. Dorr is here, and I know he's very involved in the question of legacy landscaping and water conservation. So I think this is a good opportunity, and I certainly want to take advantage of it myself if we postpone to learn more about it, because it is not simplistic in any way and is definitely something that I feel like the community needs to really have a better understanding of what may occur and what is occurring and how those effects are going to happen to our community. So I speak in favor of the postponement and look forward to learning more about this important issue. Thank you.
Is there a motion to postpone for 2 weeks?
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion to postpone for 2 weeks. Discussion on the postponement. Discussion? Hearing none. All in favor of a 2-week postponement, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
The motion to postpone for 2 weeks was approved. That will be the recommendation for Monday night. There are no further items on the agenda. Our meeting is adjourned. Thank you.